Please welcome Colette Swan and her story, The Beginning.
So, I have been digging about my ancestors recently. Not literally, because that would be gruesome. No, on the computer. It is amazing what you can find on there, on those genealogy sites. Sad stories, happy stories, family secrets. This is a story about beginnings, endings, and new beginnings. It's a story that I've heard all my life. Well, I thought I'd heard it, but I'd only heard half. And it came out by accident when I was looking at my father's birth certificate, and it surprised everybody. But most of all, this story is about the fragility and the changeability of life, and how we are all here for a reason, and we should embrace that life that we've been gifted. Charlie Murphy had lost most of his possessions on the road to Dunkirk. All he had was a rifle and a little photo of Mary. They'd been walking for weeks, bands of servicemen from decimated units, retreating to the coast, and he was exhausted. He lay in the shade of an old beach hut, long abandoned by its fun-loving owners. And despite the frequent attacks by the German planes, the men were just so tired that they slept a deep, exhausted, terrified sleep. As he slept, he dreamt of Mary, his beautiful wife. They had been childhood friends, then sweethearts, and when his draft papers had arrived in the mail, they had married. 1 week of married life with Mary, and he was gone. That had been 7 months ago. She wouldn't recognize him now. His ribs were poking out through his grubby shirt. When was the last time he'd had eaten anything other than army rations? That last night before the departure, they had shared fish and chips on a park bench. He would give his left arm for 5 more minutes on that bench. The sergeant kicked his foot. "Right, you lot, get up, we're leaving." Charlie woke with a start. "Did another ship come?" The Sarge laughed. "Oh, not just another ship, son, look." Charlie sat up and looked. What the hell? Dozens and dozens of little vessels were anchored off the coast. Fishing boats, Coast Guard boats, pleasure boats with their little bright flags still waving. They called it the miracle of the little ships. Nobody ordered them to come. They just all showed up to help with the rescue. The line of men stretched all the way down the beach and into the sea. Men queuing in the sea up to their chests in cold water. If this weren't so serious, it would be funny, because I guess the British will queue for anything to get rescued. Charlie was in the water, his legs wet to his knees. He could see the men being dragged onto the small boats or being rowed out to the larger ships. He reached into his pocket to get the photo of Mary. "We don't want you getting wet, my love." He was about to tuck her into his hat when the planes came again. Strafing the water with bullets, ping, 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 ping. The bullets hit the water, they hit the boats, they hit the men. With blood in his eyes, he couldn't see Mary anymore. He held her to his chest as the water closed over him. Mary Murphy was not at home when the telegraph arrived. She had also been queuing. Oh, this bloody rationing was a pain. 75 minutes waiting for 1 week's worth of food. So ridiculously small that you didn't even need a basket to carry it home. Although she loved children, it was times like this she was glad she didn't have any of her own. That would just be extra mouths to feed. She had lived with her father and siblings until her father's early death, leaving her in sole charge of a group of younger brothers and sisters. They had all been rehomed with various aunts and uncles, but they were always on her mind. And she was always checking they had enough to eat, clothes to wear, toys at Christmas. As she turned into her street, she saw her youngest sister, Lottie, sitting on the doorstep, head down. The other kids were playing out in the street, but something looked wrong. Mary walked faster. She almost ran until she saw Lottie's face and the telegram. Her stomach retched. This was not an uncommon sight now. These brown telegrams delivered by sad-faced boys on bicycles. He's missing, he's just missing, she muttered under her breath. Killed in action. The only word she was able to make out before she fainted, her precious little parcels scattering on the ground. After the initial shock and grief, Mary joined the world again. She took a job in a munitions factory, making shells. And she was a former seamstress, so she had really nimble fingers, and she was really good at her job, and enjoyed the company of all the other women. She was assigned to the canary department. That sounds good, doesn't it? No. The canary department was where they filled the shells with cordite and sulfur, and the name canary came from the effects of the chemicals. Their hair turned yellow, their skin turned yellow, even their eyes had a yellow tinge. All over town, there's girls walking about with strange yellow-orange hair sticking out from under their hats. Thank goodness for hair dye. And when they took off the rubber boots, the space between the ends of the boots and the tunic, yellow knees. This was a dangerous job, and the whole place could go up in a second. One little random spark would wipe them out. Every shift was like walking a tightrope. So many rules and regulations. No hair grips, no metal of any kind, no cigarettes, no matches, basic protective clothing to be worn. One night, someone had been cleaning a machine with a wire brush. One tiny spark, and boom! Mary had been outside, just leaving the changing room after her shift. The blast flattened the front of the building, the heat and the debris reaching the changing area. Several girls were killed outright, and Mary was knocked backwards against a wall, and when she awoke in the hospital, she was blind. But the doctors were hopeful that her sight would return. It just takes time. So she moved in with an aunt who would take care of her while she had, for the weeks or the months that she had to wear bandages over her eyes. And with rest and care, she began to feel well. Samuel Swan was a shipbuilder. He had always built ships. His father had been a shipbuilder. That's the way it was back then. By 1941, he was a master boilermaker. Now, night raids were common on the Clyde side. You finished your shift, you're just settling down to sleep, and off went the air raid siren. Get up, put your clothes on, down to the shelter. Now, if you were lucky, you had an Anderson shelter in your back garden, but if you didn't, it was down to the tube station with everyone else for a freezing cold and uncomfortable night. On the night of March 13th, 1941, Sammy was tired. It had been a long and heavy shift, and he really needed to get some sleep. He just closed his eyes when the siren went off again. Oh, bugger, he thought. Oh, sod off, Germans, I'm not getting out of this bed. So no amount of shouting and pleading by his dad and his brothers could shift him. So they left him to go to the shelter, and he pulled the covers back over his head and went to sleep. But what Sammy didn't know was that March the 13th, 1941, was the first night of the Clydebank Blitz. Wave upon wave of bombers flew over the docks in the town. Whole streets were obliterated. Traumatized people ran through the streets, their neighbors dead and dying. Buildings collapsed, explosions deafened the fleeing people, and fire rained down on them. Now those that could made it up into the surrounding hills and bedded down in the heather for the night. It was cold and wet, but it was safer. Now, in the midst of all this chaos, Sammy's still in bed. The bomb hit the adjoining building, causing it to collapse in a fiery heap, and Sammy's bedroom followed it down. Still in bed, he fell through 5 floors, ending up under a pile of rubble. When they pulled him out next morning, they thought he was dead, and they laid him down on the pavement with all the other bodies. Sammy sat up and frightened the shit out of the rescuers. He had a serious concussion and he lost an eye. Several weeks in hospital was way too much for Sammy. He couldn't wait to get back out there and rebuild the ships that had been destroyed in the 2 nights of raids. But when he returned home, his street was gone. Buildings remained like broken stumps and a rotting smile. None of the houses were inhabitable. And his dad and his brother had survived and found accommodation on the other side of town, in the building where Mary was recovering. Okay, Mary couldn't see him, but she heard him. Sammy had a whistle, a special whistle that his dad and his brother also did. They did it when they arrived home like a signal. She got used to hearing the whistle and wondering who it was. Now, I would do this whistle for you right now, but like Richard Dreyfuss said in Jaws, I got no spit. Just make up your own whistle. Mary, let's have a party. What do we have to celebrate, Lottie? Well, we're still alive. Surely that's worth celebrating. Oh, Mary reluctantly agreed. She was ashamed of her bandages and her reddened skin. Lottie jumped around with excitement. Don't worry, you'll be fabulous. Just leave it all to me. So the girls, they stained their legs with tea. Stockings had not been seen in years. And they drew a seam up the back in cold pencil. Sexy. Face powder, that had not been seen in years either. Bit of whitewash from the walls outside, or a bit of flour, that would work. Lipstick. Little cherry candy on the lips and on the cheeks. Gorgeous. Sammy and Mary sat together at the party. The woman with the bandages and the shy man with the glass eye. He told her about the ships he'd built and their exotic destinations. He told her about the boilers he'd made for the Queen Mary. They talked all night, ignoring the party around them. In the midst of a world in chaos, they dared to talk about the future. They talked about the places they would go, and in the 1950s,